The events of Revelation 6 seal mirror the events around Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection almost exactly. Why is that? Is God trying to tell us something important? That's what we're talking about today, and we're starting right now. First, a shout out to our community member, Chris A. Pennington, for bringing this super cool comparison to our attention. I know you are going to be amazed by it, as I was when you see it. Now, Christians have long wondered where the resurrection falls in the book of Revelation. Some will point to Revelation 20:4 and 5, where the resurrection is mentioned. But that isn't where it takes place. It is simply where it is recorded. In 1 Thessalonians 4:16 through 17, we see the resurrection take place while Jesus is still in the air, and that the resurrected saints meet the Lord in the air. Yet in Revelation 20, Jesus has already returned and fought the battle of Armageddon on the ground. So the mention of the resurrection in Revelation 20 is out of chronological order. It has to happen somewhere else in Revelation. But where? Sometime when Jesus is in the air. Because a vast multitude appears suddenly before the throne of God in resurrection bodies after the sixth seal and after Jesus has appeared in the air, this is the most likely timing of Revelation's resurrection. Since this appearance of the multitude takes place after the sixth seal, then that's where we think that resurrection happens. Although this is pretty solid evidence, it would be nice to have even more evidence in Revelation that this is the timing of the resurrection. And this is where Chris's observation comes into play. Obviously, the resurrection of our Lord on the Feast of First Fruits back in the first century is not only the greatest event in human history, but also likely a foreshadow of the eventual resurrection of the righteous of all the ages. It makes sense then that the things that happened back in the first century will happen again. The Bible frequently foreshadows end-time events, so let's look at what happened in the first century. In Acts chapter 2, Peter quotes the prophet Joel and says this was fulfilled at the time of Jesus. Let's look at that verse. For these people are not drunk as you suppose, since it is only the third hour of the day, but this is what was uttered through the prophet Joel. And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even on my male servants and female servants in those days I will pour out my spirit, and they shall prophesy. Peter explained that the pouring out of the Spirit on the disciples in Jerusalem led to those disciples speaking in tongues. But Peter didn't stop there. And I will show you wonders in the heavens above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the day of the Lord comes, the great and magnificent day. And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Now these things obviously were fulfilled in the first century because Peter tells us that they were. But you're probably asking, isn't this passage in Joel that Peter quotes really about the end times? Isn't it about the day of the Lord and the sixth seal? Yes, the passage in Joel is about both. And that is where we get some of this comparison between the events of Jesus' resurrection and the resurrection of the end times. So let's look at this in more detail. If you look at the table on the screen, you can see all 6 events and the incredible parallels. You might want to come back to this slide after the video is over and take a screenshot to study it further. By quoting Joel, Peter told us there was an earthquake at the time of Jesus' death. And we see that also in Matthew's gospel, when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place. They were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this is the Son of God." That is one at the time of the crucifixion. But there was even a second earthquake, maybe an aftershock at the resurrection. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. So there were two earthquakes at the time of Jesus' resurrection. The sixth seal events also begin with an earthquake. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. Next, the sun was darkened at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. Now from the 6th hour, there was darkness all over the land until the 9th hour. And at the sixth seal, both the sun and moon were darkened, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood. Was the moon darkened at Jesus' crucifixion too? The Gospels don't tell us, but Peter says in Acts that the events around Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection were foretold by the events of Joel, so it's likely a lunar eclipse happened. 2 lunar eclipses happened in the month of Nisan, which took place around the time of Jesus' resurrection. In 33 AD, it happened on Nisan 14, which is the day of the crucifixion, and in AD 34 on Nisan 17. It is also possible that a supernatural darkening of the moon took place that scientists don't know anything about and we don't have a date for. So what's the next event? In Revelation we read, the sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. The sky rolls up like a scroll to reveal the coming of God, who is Jesus. What happened in the first century resurrection that was like this? And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone. That's right. Both an earthquake and the rolling away of the stone. After that, we learn in Revelation that the earth dwellers, those who will be left behind at the time of the rapture, hide from the face of Jesus. What happened in the first century? And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. Again, amazing one-for-one correspondence. Back in the first century to the sixth seal. And in this case, it was the fear and hiding of the unsaved. And finally, in Matthew, we learn that the Lord had risen. He is not here, for he has risen. And in Revelation 7:9, we see the results of a resurrection of the righteous from all the generations. I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands. So there are 6 parallels: an earthquake, then the darkening of the sun, likely the darkening of the moon, the rolling away of the sky or the stone, the fear and hiding of unbelievers, and finally the resurrection. This cannot be just coincidence that all 6 events around the resurrection in the first century are the same and in the same order as those in the end times. But you might be scratching your head saying, hey, wait a minute. That great multitude in Revelation 7, you said they are in resurrection bodies. Are you sure? Don't you think they are just the souls of those who died in the Great Tribulation? Well, click right here and learn all the reasons that they can't just be souls and have to be newly raptured saints in resurrection bodies. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.